fucking cunt is still a cunt. Still a cunt. A fucking cunt. A fucking cunt. Boris Johnson still a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson still.
Can I start with an analogy, if I may? It made me think of a video game. I read Matthew Parris's column on Saturday in the Times. Matthew Parris, of course, a former Conservative Party MP, a former Conservative MP, no less, and widely regarded as one of the most respected right-wing journalists in the country. For the benefit of younger listeners, if you admire a single column by somebody, it doesn't mean that you are endorsing every single thing they've ever said or written. Well, we seem to be inhabiting a universe in which nobody is allowed to be nuanced or wrong about some things, but right about other things. It's I suppose, an element of our binary zeitgeist. But he briefly contemplated why Johnson does it. As with Brexit now, I find the Johnson regime more interesting for the psychology that it highlights than the actual politics. The politics of it have been flushed down the toilet, really, from the moment you were told to believe in something impossible as evidence of your ideological purity and your commitment to the cause. It's why flags and national anthems and bogus claims of patriotism have become so commonplace in the country, and people end up getting their knickers in a twist about the dismantling of a statue of a mass murderer. It's nuts, right? Wherever you sit, all roads lead to this ludicrous so-called culture war. But with Johnson, the psychology of it now is fascinating. And what Matthew Parris posited, was the idea that he gets his kicks out of collecting people. The thesis of the column was that every single thing, every single person he touches is corrupted. Like a vampire. He talked about the tooth marks on the necks of everybody from Dominic Cummings to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Every single thing, every single human being he comes into contact with, whether he marries them, impregnates them, promotes them, or promises to protect them, they all end up corrupted by him. They all end up worse off than they were before, whether they're left holding the baby or whether they're left in Iranian isolation, or whether they're left licking their wounds in Dominic Cummings' case in a London townhouse, or whether they're left wherever it may be, just staring themselves in the mirror and wondering how it came to this. In the case of somebody perhaps like Kwasi Kwarteng or Matt Hancock, or whatever poor soul gets sent out today to defend the indefensible. Whatever he touches, whatever the opposite of a Midas touches, whatever he touches turns to soil. And Parris made the point that he seems to relish the collection of people, whether he gets you to surrender your body, to surrender your vote, or to surrender your dignity. The analogy Matthew Parris used was, it's like getting a sparrow to eat out of your hand. You've got no interest whatsoever in the welfare of the sparrow, and you don't even care what you're feeding the sparrow. It's that successful act of getting a sparrow to eat out of your hand. And it made me think, would you believe, of a video game I used to play, where you collected the souls of your victims. The soul emerged from your victim in a kind of cloud, a miasma, a spiritual miasma, and you pressed X and sort of inhaled the soul. And for every soul you inhaled, you grew in strength. And I wonder whether Johnson, on some level, is aware of his own, I don't know what words to use anymore, because so I think I've overused some of the more extreme adjectives that you might apply to him, or some of the more extreme words. I mean, do you remember when I used to run through the litany of everyone he'd lied to, everyone he'd betrayed, everyone he'd let down or disowned almost? And it was incredible, starting with his school teachers and ending with you, his voters, and in between taking in wives, employers, party leaders, mistresses. I mean, it's incredible, but it didn't land, did it? It didn't really halt his rise. But the notion of why other people let him get away with it is what interests me most today. It may not be what interests you. If you were reduced to a pale shadow of a proper funeral on May the 20th of 2020, I may be calling it wrong when I talk to you about being more interested today in how other people let him get away with it. And it's only 9 minutes after 10 and we're together until 1 o'clock. So just trust me that we'll find time and we'll find space for you to just record your revulsion, really, at the idea of them having a bring your own bottle party when you, as I was during lockdown, albeit later in the year, were reduced to saying goodbye to someone you loved in circumstances that you wouldn't have wished upon your worst enemy. Soul Reaver, thank you. I've got the best listeners in the world. It was called Soul Reaver, I think. I thought it might have been Soul Reaper, but I digress. I think that's what he does. I think on some level, he's aware that he's not like other people. He's aware that he's got no conscience, really. He's aware that his own teacher said, didn't he, that he doesn't think the rules should apply to him. And he knows on some level that's not right. The conundrum, the contradiction at the heart of Boris Johnson is probably a form of self-hatred. The idea that he doesn't actually want to be like this. He sees other people who care for their loved ones, who manage to be faithful or manage to make commitments, who have at least some concern for the truth, who sustain proper loyalties, proper friendships, proper love in their lives, and he feels wronged. He feels a victim of injustice. Why can't I feel like that? Why do I find it so easy, he asks himself, to ride roughshod over everything that might be described as a value or evidence of integrity? Why? And he ends up, I think, wanting to denigrate everybody else, subconsciously, to get them to eat out of his hand in order to prove that on some level they are perhaps as bad as he is. And then he sucks in their souls and seals up his bag. That's all I've got, because there's 100 people on this invitation list, and it's taken 18 months for the truth to emerge. 100 people. And 5 days later, Dominic Cummings sat in the Rose Garden and told you that he'd driven to Barnard Castle to test his eyes. That was 5 days later. That's one mystery solved, isn't it? He had him over a barrel. There goes another soul. I'm not going to do that noise again, I think. That would probably be a promise worth making. But Dominic Cummings had them over a barrel. Dominic Cummings, obviously, I would say now, was like, of course I should be fired. Of course I should resign. But hey, you lads had a big party just 5 days ago. And therefore, we're going to have to come up with some way of defending me. And I don't care how base and obvious it is, as long as we can get away with it. So the question when Boris Johnson is in charge becomes not what is true, not what is right, not what is honest, what is just, what is fair. The question, the only question, the abiding question, the overarching question is always and forever, what can we get away with? Did you see the smirk last night? The little Benny Hill type twitching of the upper lip when he was asked whether he'd been at the party. How many times have you forgotten about attending a party in your own back garden? The little smirk, the little twitch, that little it's all good fun. It's all a game. What can I get away with? Of course he could have answered yes or no. There's not a sentient human being alive incapable of answering yes or no to a question about a very specific party at a very specific time in a very specific place. In this case, your own back garden. Did you attend the party? What can I get away with? Did you send a message to Lord Brownlow asking for more money? What can I get away with? Did you really say that there'd be 350 million? What can I get away with? Did you really spend the evening with Jennifer Arcure? What can I get away with? Did you really say that there'd be no checks on the... What can I get away with? The truth doesn't matter at all. So, what can I get away with? Did you send a message to Lord Brownlow asking for more money? I changed my phone and forgot about it. Now, everyone knows that's a lie, but he can get away with it because we can't prove it. I drove to Barnard Castle to test my eyesight, but everybody knows that's a lie, but we can't prove it. I am going to wait for Sue Gray to conduct her investigation into whether I attended the party. Everybody knows that's a dodge. Everybody knows that's a swerve, but we can't prove it. So he's got away with it for another day. I remember standing in my headmaster's study, accused of stealing penguin biscuits from the larder. I hadn't stolen them, but I knew who had. It was a dormitory-wide raid of the school larder, and we came back with about 6 packets of penguin biscuits, and we shared them out, and we ate the penguins. And I was the idiot who didn't throw the wrappers away. They were found at the bottom of my bed by matron, and I was hauled in to the headmaster's study because the penguins had been noted. The missing penguins had been noted. And I'm standing in my headmaster's study, aged 12 or 13, knowing that there is a beating on the way, and knowing that I had very little chance of getting away with it. And the question I remember asking myself is, what can I get away with? There's no earthly way that I'm dobbing in my mates. There's no earthly way that I'm giving him the names of the people that were on the raid. There's no earthly way I'm doing anything except trying to avoid getting beaten by this 6'3" man in front of me. And the previous week we'd been on a school trip, and there had been penguin biscuits on the coach, and I just reached for this ludicrous explanation that no, sir, that they were. I saved them from the school trip to Alton Towers, and I know I shouldn't have done. I know we should have eaten them on the coach, sir. I'm very sorry, sir, but I saved them, and I ate them 2 nights ago. That's where they came from. And he knew I was lying, and I knew I was lying, and I knew that he knew I was lying, but he couldn't prove it, so he couldn't beat me. And that is our Prime Minister. Except the stakes are rather higher. And the protection of my schoolmates, let alone my poor little, podgy little 13-year-old hands, is a rather less serious priority than the integrity of an entire country. So there you go. How? Not so much Johnson. We'll move on to Johnson. But why, when what is now so obvious to everybody has been obvious to some of us from the start, why does everybody around him facilitate, obviate, accelerate what is so obviously wrong? It's not even politics now. It's a massive party. Laura Kuntzberg, the BBC's political editor, miraculously unearthed emails that were sent at the time of the party saying, what the hell is going on? So if you're thinking of ringing in to defend him, just bear in mind there were people on the actual recipient list. There were people in the actual building. There were people on the actual guest list who quite rightly thought it was a bizarre combination of ridiculous and profoundly wrong. So if you are tugging your forelock so hard this morning that you're even thinking of sticking up for him, give your head a wobble, please. Because the only question this morning is how and why people can not just look the other way, but join in, can land on his hand like a little sparrow and start pecking these grains of dishonesty. I don't get it. What do they get in return? How can people put up with, go along with, actively encourage, and even defend this sort of behaviour? 18 minutes after 10 is the time. The number you need, because my goodness me, it's time someone interrupted me, is 0345 6060973. Talk me through how you think this can happen, because in my life, in my world, in my universe, in my career and in my family, it couldn't. It could not happen. How can he preside over an administration which thinks it's acceptable to invite 100 people to a party where you weren't allowed that many people at a funeral, and nobody either hauls him over the coals or blows the whistle? 0345 6060973. And if you think you can pick a hole in the theory of what can I get away with? How can I postpone judgment for just another day? Then you can go straight to the front of the queue, because at risk of sounding conceited, I think that's the beginning, the middle and the end of Boris Johnson's modus operandi. I think some days I should be allowed to clock off after the monologue and the phones can take care of themselves. The switchboard Keith can answer all the calls and you can just come straight to air with no interruptions from me. But there it is. And let me rejig slightly the call to arms at the end of that introduction. I do get angry, but more I get sad. I get sad at what we've done to ourselves, to our country, to our children's future. I get sad that it has been so obvious for so long, and I get sad that I don't know what the way out is. But you can talk to me today about whatever you want to talk to me about, from the starting point of yet more evidence of a government that, like the proverbial fish, has rotted from the head down. And I can't even say to you that this would be the apotheosis. I can't even say to you that it's over, that there isn't more to come. Because hand on heart, however you voted in 2019 or 2016, hand on heart, could you look me in the eye and tell me that pretty much anything is beyond possibility, beyond belief? Could you? Really? And could you today look me in the eye and tell me that the what can I get away with model of living, not just governing or working, the what can I get away with model of living? How can I avoid responsibility for my own actions and my own lies has not now conclusively and comprehensively corrupted every level of our government and therefore potentially our country. 23 minutes after 10 is the time. Rosemary's in Cheshire. Rosemary, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I'm really phoning in because I was motivated by the fact that the day that Boris held his party, my husband was being buried. We were only allowed 10 mourners, and people that respected him chose to take to the streets and socially distance and pay their respects outside his office.
Gosh.
The reason I know your question, in answer to your question, I think if you surround yourself with corrupt people that have massive self-interest, that need to keep Boris in place, then it's a bit like the king's new clothes. Nobody's going to say Boris did it or Boris.
But why? But they knew. I like, you know me. I've been banging the Emperor's New Clothes drum for the most of my life, it feels like some days, Rosemary. And may I say also on behalf of everybody listening, how sorry I am, not just for your loss, but for the circumstances in which you had to say goodbye to your husband. But they know he's naked. That's the bit, isn't it? It's they know he's naked, but they'll look down the barrel of a television camera and insist that he's clothed in the finest robes. They weren't corrupt to start with. And they know that we know they're lying, and yet still it goes on. That's the bit I don't get.
Well, I mean, it's just a culture now, and it's growing. Yeah. You know, I mean, they all want to hang on to their jobs. I view them as career politicians. I don't think they have a heart. I don't think they have
career spads, career bureaucrats, whatever it is, and they want to get a nice gig afterwards at a think tank or a PR company or a newspaper or wherever it may be.
And I mean, I think as with regard to Dominic Cummings, obviously. Boris held on to Dominic as long as he could because Dominic really was a bit of a loose cannon if it came to light that all of these stories that, you know, he was aware
we can
of.
allow ourselves a bit of a flex this morning, can't we? It's hard not to see a relationship between the barefaced Barnard Castle, I nearly used a rude word there, I'll say Rolex, the barefaced Barnard Castle Rolex, and the fact that 5 days previously they were having another party in the garden with a paper trail going right back to Boris Johnson's other right-hand man, or his left-hand man, if Cummings was his right-hand man. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't expect anything else now. But what I do find there's massive complacency amongst the public.
Yes.
It's perhaps because people have got really serious issues of how to pay their rent and how to feed their families.
Winter is coming, Rosemary, isn't it? Winter is coming. Yeah,
and I feel sometimes that, I don't expect everyone to engage with this because some people are just, literally working furiously to try and earn the money to keep their families because that's the culture we have.
But it doesn't matter how hard you're rowing in the galley. You'd imagine that some interest in the course being steered by the captain would be able to be fostered, but you're right, the harder you're rowing, the less time you've got to worry about the direction that the boat is is going in. Rosemary, thank you. My condolences again. And that is, I'm glad we started with Rosemary, because that is it, isn't it? It really, the luxury of taking a step back and trying to unpick the spaghetti of British politics is, it's an important facet of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. But really, the visceral revulsion at this party, at another party, and also the refusal simply to say whether you'd attended. I'll play you that clip, and I'll let you imagine the little Benny Hill style twitch of the lip. It's just fun and games. 10 people at your husband's funeral, you say? Yeah, it's just fun and games. What can I get away with today? Kate's in Kingston upon Thames. Kate, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello,
Thank you
Kate.
for having me on.
You're very welcome.
It occurs to me that there are two things in play here. One is that on these very nice islands, people are slotted in at birth pretty much to where they'll be most of their life. And that is done by education, by speech, by financial circumstances, location.
Yeah.
We are where we are. So this whole thing about social mobility is a bit of a papering over the cracks. It never happens because of our set up our constitutional lack of. So that's the one
The
thing.
status quo. The status quo. You can throw a
right.
tomato at it, but nothing more damaging than a tomato.
So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we go way back to the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. Now, it's okay for the poor man to go and nick a pheasant off the estate because, him in the castle, he'll see me all right.
Well, it's not
I'll be
actually.
okay.
He would have got deported to Australia at one point. But I take your point.
Depends. The old saying of the long arm of the law actually means, as far as I understand it, that the Lord,
No, I understand. You can
reach out and actually rescue you.
You can nick a chicken, but if you think you're ever going to have any land to raise your own, then you've got another thing coming.
Well, exactly. So this culture is deeply, deeply embedded in people, and Johnson knows exactly how to play that because he's not only was brought up in Europe and mixed through all that. He's got different cultural roots other than Europe. The Kemal family from Turkey. He's seen the whole gamut of European culture, and he's taken over British culture, and he's got his own hang-ups, as we know, from his sad time in Brussels, whatever it was. So, he knows how to play the system with the establishment, and he knows how to play us. And actually, you know what? This whole experience over the last 6 or so years has made me look in the mirror and see what an inadequate person I am.
Oh, gosh.
It really has. And
what do you mean?
What I mean is, listen, I can just about string 2 words together. I can do certain things, but I tell you what, I can't build a house, I can't run a lathe, I can't drive an HGV, I can't keep the country going.
Yes.
However much I talk to you, and you're a very nice chap, and we are not the people who are keeping this country together. The people who are keeping this country together are people who work so hard physically that most of them retire and die fairly quickly because they are still flogging their guts out to keep a roof over their head and food on the table.
That's beautifully put, Kate.
And, why Boris Johnson can get away with it is because we cannot break
deference, because you cannot help but, or maybe you can, but I can't help but agree with everything you've just said, but then also clock that many of the people you describe somehow think that Boris Johnson is on their side. And that is, of course, the great triumph of, which is why you reference history, the great triumph of hundreds of years, 1,000 years perhaps, or more of English. And I say English advisedly, of English history. That quote from All Things Bright and Beautiful is, to complete it, because it's incredible that we sing this in our schools, or we certainly used to. But the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high or lowly and ordered their estate. So it's know your place, plebs, with divine authority. It fits, doesn't it? I mean, Kate's brilliantly explained model of deference and sort of acting against your own interest because you've been persuaded that the status quo is right. God made us high and lowly and ordered our estate. The rich man in his castle, which is a position to which Johnson aspires. And then they're fraudulent kings as well, of course, because they rely upon the patronage of the truly rich people, the people that own half of Hampshire, or the people who've brought so much money out of Russia that they can buy the other half. They bend a knee to those people because the crumbs that fall from those tables are bigger than the loaves that we have in our homes. But it is, just true. It's a big fish to swallow. It's a big thing to understand if you don't already, but it is clearly true. It was singing hymns about why it's God's will for poor people to be begging at the gate of a king's castle. Then fast forward 100 years and you come to a neat understanding of how someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg can be considered to be either intelligent or good for the country, a suitable leader for the country. I haven't even mentioned Grenfell Tower. 25 minutes to 11. But to stare back a bit, and the question of how does he get away with it, or more importantly, perhaps, why do other people let him? Do you think you would? I don't know. You can't be cocky with these questions in these circumstances. I fell for it briefly in the last years of the decade before last, when he ran for mayor of London, and that sort of Benny Hill bonhomie temporarily blinded me to the truth. But if I'd ended up working for him, we've got mortgages to pay, kids need shoes. These are valid concerns. What would you do instead? You're earning 100 grand in Downing Street. Would you be able to earn that somewhere else? I don't know what the calculations are. And then, of course, there are the people that love it. So apart from delusion and denial, what other possible reason can there be for going along with it? And have you got any criticisms at all of the what can I get away with analysis? Whenever he's doing something that you struggle to understand, stop applying your own moral compass to it. Stop applying your own value system. Stop applying your own conscience. And ask yourself this: if I cared only about postponing trouble in the hope that it would go away, what would I do now? If I only cared about postponing trouble. Actually, let's double down. If I only cared about self-gratification first and postponing the consequences of my own conduct second, what would I do now? So you're always going to pursue self-gratification, whether it is sexual or professional. And then number two, how do I postpone the consequences of my conduct? Hopefully forever, but if it's only for a day, I'll take it. Answer, claim, I changed my phone and I forgot about asking that bloke for money. Claim, well, there's an inquiry going on, so at this point I can't answer whether or not I attended a party in my own back garden. Just think about it, because I think this is the key to getting everything right now. I'm in a party surrounded by Irish businessmen, and they're saying there's not going to be any border checks, are there? Because, look for where we're sitting, champ. It can't quite see how it's going to. I promise you there will be no border checks. Self-gratification, self-promotion. Second, how can I possibly avoid the consequences of what I have just done? How can I avoid the consequences of reality, of the truth? Answer, there'll be no checks on the border. I've changed my phone and forgot all about, there's an inquiry going on. It would be inappropriate for me to answer the question. It was IT lessons. It was technology lessons in the flat with the pole in the middle of it with the woman who's now coughed about the extent of our affair. It was technology lessons. I mean, think about it. Every single turn, there's an example. Every single time he's caught with his fingers in the till, he claims they're not his fingers and it's not actually a till. Technology lessons. You'd forgotten that one, hadn't you? Why were you going to Jennifer Arcuri's flat when you were Mayor of London? Technology lessons. What happened how could you possibly not know? Why did you tell Lord Guy that you don't know where the money came from when you sent a message to the bloke that gave you the money? Well, I changed my phone. Every single call. We should make a list, but I'm busy. Kate's in Neasden. Kate, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you for having me on your show.
You're very welcome.
First of all, I want to say that I agree with many of your statements, and there is a deeper issue here, which I think we forget to mention. And I'm talking from my from my professional perspective.
Yes.
And
are you a prison officer?
No, I'm an emotional trauma recovery life coach.
Wow.
Right. So I will tell you that if you go back to our, Prime Minister childhood, and you look at the dynamics at home, and you look at that obviously high profile, both parents high profile, and their main, I think, way of living was to preserve the image.
Yes.
So if you go there and you see that there was a lot of domestic abuse in his childhood, and his mother was basically abused by his father.
This is on the record.
This is on the record,
yeah,
yes.
Okay.
public record. So basically, he was, she tried her best. It's not
and the sexual incontinence of his father as well. The reported affairs with one of the au pairs that had been employed to look after the children.
Correct. Everything is in public record. So basically, it heavily exposed our Prime Minister to violence and abuse and mistreat and betrayal. And remember, as children, we normalize patterns of behaviors of our carers. This is how we form our first relationship with our carers, with our parents. So he was exposed to it from the very early on. And
he then constructs a character to protect himself from the consequences of what he's endured.
Correct. And this is his way of survival. Remember that trauma, when you experience any traumatic event, whether it's even COVID is collective trauma, but I'm talking about any car accident or a sudden death of a beloved one, you are going into the 4 different states, and trauma is either fight or flight, freeze or appease. So I think he was frozen. He wasn't able to express his emotions. He wasn't able to connect with either of his parents emotionally. So he detached himself from emotions.
Sent away to boarding school, of course, which exacerbates all of it.
Yes. And there is a numbness, and the way to survive in this world is basically to appease everyone and do things other way. I understand this, and I've written about it myself at some length, and I just want you to address one other point, which is lots of people who've been through similar do not end up like Boris Johnson. They do not end up devoid of conscience or morality or integrity. This is not that he's devoid. This is the way he sees the world. And I think is that there is also, as I said in the beginning, what was the most and is the most important part of the family values is the image.
Okay, so it's all about, well, what can I get away with? Doesn't matter what the truth is. What can we present to the world in a way that will best serve us?
And there is a pressure from all the members of the family. Be aware of that.
Gosh. I've thought a lot about the stuff that you described because I had a similar schooling. Thank God my home life was nothing like that. I had a very similar schooling myself, and it tallies with me. Although I will read out a little message from Scott who says, quick, cut her off before I start feeling sorry for him. But I think you should, oddly, even if you were reduced to burying your husband in straitened circumstances as a consequence of the restrictions that were brought in, because the restrictions were necessary. Him riding roughshod over them is perhaps a consequence of character flaws that were that have grown from seed sown at the earlier stage. But I do accept that some people will struggle to muster up much sympathy for that. It's odd, isn't it, that some people already are feeling sorry for, I feel so sorry for him. I get a lot of messages from people telling me about their Daily Mail reading parents. I don't know why you think I might be a suitable repository for that kind of experience, but you said, well, no, my mum's already saying that she feels sorry for him. I gave him your book for Christmas, James, but we still haven't broken the spell. He's doing his best. He's doing his best. If this is his best, I mean, it's a bit like, just imagine he was driving a lorry or a bus even. He's driving the bus and you're on it and he's just run over 14 people and you turn to the person next to you and say, oh, well, he's doing his best. I feel quite sorry for him. It's incredible. And of course, as Kate reminds us, it is all down to one man. A fish rots from the head down. And that fascinates me. Because I'm not confident enough to look you in the eye and say that if I'd been caught up in this, if I'd fallen for the Brexit lies and then as Theresa May fell by the wayside after her desperate and doomed attempt to mitigate some of the damage that we'd voted to inflict upon ourselves, and Johnson, of course, because he's got no conscience, rises up thinking, well, I may as well, how can I get away with this for another few years? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll run for Prime Minister. And I'll tell a whole new load of lies about everything from the border in Northern Ireland to imports and exports to prosperity and business and commerce and regulations. Whatever you want to hear, I will say it if it makes you look briefly at me in a warm and loving way. And so inevitably he rises up. But if you're hitched to that bandwagon, has anyone unhitched themselves yet? See, Cummings doesn't really count, I'm afraid. Trying to rebrand himself as some sort of retrospective arbiter of morality. The man lied through his teeth about Barnard Castle and sat on his hands while all of the decisions and the delays that he now daily castigates on his ludicrous subscriber-only Substack column or whatever you call them. He was there. He was literally there. The crumbs that were plastered around Boris Johnson's mouth while he claimed he'd never touched your biscuits. Dominic Cummings was picking them off and popping them in his own gob for the best part of 18 months, and now to turn around and go, it's outrageous, the shopping trot. It's pathetic. Only a benefit of the kind of class system that other callers have referred to could end up being slung out of Downing Street after being hand in glove with the worst excesses and the worst leadership and the most incompetence and the most murderous of policies. Only someone schooled in the English class system and married to a spectator journalist could waltz away and think that he might be able to somehow rehabilitate his own reputation. And the tragedy is, of course, that you can in this country. It'll probably end up with a column on the Daily Telegraph like that Nick Timothy bloke who presided over Theresa May's electoral disasters. If you tug your forelock hard enough, the newspaper owners will look after you. So, what about the littler people? What about on that guest list of 100 or among the 30 or 40 people that went to the party? The ones that are never going to get a column in the Telegraph or a little pat on the back off Andrew Neil or whatever other supposedly anti-establishment arbiter of political integrity you want to pick today. What's in it for them? I don't get it. I know a couple of people that have gone to work at Downing Street and I don't get it. Especially not if you want to call yourself a journalist. What's in it for them? Is it power? Is it some sense? I mean, do you get treated better at parties? You're going to the wrong parties. Seriously. That sounds like a throwaway line, but if you're hanging out with people who think, oh, gosh, he works for Boris Johnson at Downing Street, or he works for Theresa May at Downing Street, or he works for Tony Blair at Downing Street. If you're going to those kind of parties, so maybe that's not fair on Tony Blair. I don't know. And people think, oh, that's a bit cool. Then you're you're hanging out with the wrong people. You want to hang out with people who look you in the eye and say, crikey, I hope they're paying you a lot of money, mate, because that's a hell of a lot of soul you've just flogged. I don't know. What do you think? How does this happen? How does this happen? He's been in power now for the best part of... When did he get elected? Middle of 2019, he took over as leader and then won the election in the end of 2019. So we're looking at the best part of 2 years, are we? 3 years. And people are still waking up today going, oh, my goodness, I can't believe what a wrong 'un he is. How does that happen? Who do you blame? If the scales have fallen from your eyes, I don't blame you, because the effort put into plastering those scales all over your eyes is immense. The richest and most powerful people in the country put those scales on your eyes. And, of course, their placemen, their placewomen, their client journalists and their sycophants, and all of the politicians queuing up to defend it. So if the scales are now falling from your eyes, who do you think put them there? If you're patient, you will get through. A busy morning, understandably. I'm not going to lie. I derive an enormous amount of gratification from tweets and texts expressing how much you're looking forward to the programme on a morning like this. I am, yes, quite right, I am daft enough also to think, well, why don't you look forward to it this much every day when we're talking about parking tickets and e-scooters or Millie Molly Mandy saying something silly about there being 24 hours in a day. You should look forward to the show this much every day. These are the easy days. These are the days where, the monologues write themselves. Not that anyone actually writes the monologues. Except Keith. 10:52 is the time. Roger's in Godalming in Surrey. Roger, what would you like to say? What's going on, Roger?
Good morning, James. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
And also, thank you for really keeping the pressure up on this situation. I'm just compelled to ring, really, and I'm amazed that I got through just to be able to vent how I feel. But you put it really, really clearly when you described Johnson's face as having that Benny Hill look when he was being asked those questions by the reporters. I mean, that is exactly, beautifully describes exactly what
the twitch, isn't it? The little twitch. Because Benny Hill, of course, channeled a schoolboy for slightly smutty and often very funny and entirely comedic reasons. But it is that sort of idea that if I can channel a cheeky little schoolboy, then I might just get away with it for another day.
And as you said, get away with it, which is a complete and utter disgrace. Yep. I mean, part of the problem in my mind is that sadly there's very little political opposition that's strong enough to really bring them down. I mean, having Sir Ed Davey, who was in the House of Commons last week, and the Speaker introducing him as Ed Balls, gives you an idea that the leader of a once once really strong Liberal
That's
Party.
not really fair on it, Davey. It's Lindsay Hoyle's fault, but I do take your point. It's not a mistake that would be made if the leader of the Liberal Democrats was a...
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And I like the man, don't get me wrong.
Of course.
And Sir Keir Starmer, I like him too. But somehow they are just not managing to make any gains against this extraordinary government. I'm the age of 62, and I've voted in a few elections,
yes.
and never, ever in my life have I ever felt so demoralised and appalled at what we look at and what we hear. And it's so concerning that nothing seems to happen. He gets away with it.
Is it because it's unrelenting that people manage to ignore it? Because I don't like the parallels with Trump because, oddly, I'm quite patriotic and I hate the idea that there are parallels to be drawn with such a depraved political movement and such a depraved human being. But is it because you can sit here quite often, Roger, as I'm sure you've done, and say in normal circumstances this would be a resignation issue, or in normal circumstances heads would roll. But there have been so many incidents which, at any point in the past, even under Theresa May, we're not talking about going back 100 years or anything like that. Even under Theresa May, these would have been actions that were seriously punishable, actions with consequences. Amber Rudd, for example, actually resigned on a point of principle as a matter of integrity. It feels like a decade. It feels like a lifetime ago. Is it because there's so much that the historical relationship between actions and consequences has been almost death by 1,000 cuts?
But this is the question. Why is there no responsibility being taken? You've spoken about those 100 people who received that email. What are they all thinking? What are they all wondering what's going on? And as you say, the people who work in Downing Street, but there's probably a cachet of power, whoever is the leader, that, I've worked in Downing Street, I work within that sphere.
Yeah, it must open too many doors. It greases too many passages. And of course, the tragedy is that association with any Downing Street delivers the kudos. I don't think a year or 2 years or 10 years from now, association with this administration will be treated differently from association with any previous ones. It is just almost like a badge. Either you've got it or you haven't.
I truly hope that this is the line in the sand. I really do. That the pressure will be perhaps too intense for him to be able to survive. Every time I've thought to myself, this has got to be it. This has got to be it. And it's being drip fed very carefully, I'm sure, from somebody.
Somebody somewhere seems to be exercising a degree of control over the release of the information. Although I'm not sure. I think if I've changed my mind about anything over the last few years, it's the idea that these people, whether it's Cummings or Johnson or anyone else, are clever enough to have a sort of master plan in place. But I don't know, and I probably never will. Roger, thank you very much. I'll refer you to the clip. You can't hear a Benny Hill-style twitch of the lip, but when asked whether or not he attended the party, the invitation to which emerged yesterday, even in those circumstances, there's that little kind of brief pursing, the smile. I wonder if you can hear it, actually. There's only one way to find out.
I want to ask you about the latest allegations on Christmas parties. Did you and Carrie attend the Downing Street party that was organised by Martin Reynolds on the 20th of May?
All that, as you know, is the subject of a proper investigation by Sue Gray.
So have you already been interviewed by Sue Gray? And if not, do you object to her questioning you again about this?
All that is subject for an interview, for an investigation by Sue Gray.
Once more with feeling, because that's incredible. No criticism of the journalist, because you get moments in those circumstances. But if you've got one really good question, just ask it again and again and again. Seriously, that's the end of my TED talk. Did you go to the party? Did you go to the party?
I want to ask you about the latest allegations on Christmas parties. Did you and Carrie attend the Downing Street party that was organised by Martin Reynolds on the 20th of May?
All that, as you know, is the subject of a proper investigation by Sue Gray.
So have you already been interviewed by Sue Gray? And if not, do you object to her questioning you again about this?
All that is subject for an interview, for an investigation by Sue Gray.
You can hear it. He actually laughs. I mean, you can hear it. It's smirk. Call it what you will. He laughs. It's funny. Oh, come on. Have the scales fallen yet? And if they have, who do you think put them there? Because he couldn't have put them there without help. Without help from Rupert Murdoch. Without help from the Barclay brothers. Without help from Andrew Neil over at the Spectator. Whoever you want to pick. Who put the scales there? Not just over Johnson, but over Brexit as well. But today's not the day for banging that drum. But you wouldn't have one without the other. We can all agree on that, surely. Even the people that still like him. You like him because he gave you the other thing. You haven't yet woken up to the fact that the other thing is even more rotten than the new thing. It's coming up to 10:59. I can tell you that Angela Rayner, who I imagine popped into your head while Roger in Godalming was talking about the absence of political opposition, the absence perhaps of political fire, the idea that somebody really should be leading the line on the anger that this behaviour generates. I don't know about that. I have developed a great fondness for slow and steady wins the race over the last few years, seeing the ludicrous extremities of both political parties taking over, thankfully in the case of the Labour Party temporarily, in the case of the Conservative Party possibly permanently, but they're usually quite good at prioritising power over anything else. But the idea that you need a voice of opposition that will articulate the rage that the country feels is, I imagine, a role that most people would think Angela Rayner most obviously and best suited to. No reason, of course, why they can't play it like Batman and Robin, but she has had an urgent question granted to ask Boris Johnson to make a statement later. And relax. So, or not, actually, as the case may be. But you'll remember that the Sue Gray, the Prime Minister referred to as conducting an investigation into these so-called Downing Street parties, the Prime Minister reduced to being unable to answer publicly a question about whether or not he attended a party in his own garden. I've done it again, haven't I? I've said something out loud. It was like the time, like last week, may even have been yesterday. The Prime Minister reduced to claiming that he couldn't remember where he got the money from to pay for every single thing he sees when he opens his eyes in his own home. Such was the extent of that redecoration undertaken to the tune of about £140,000. I couldn't remember who I couldn't remember. Change my phone, WhatsApp. Every single time, every wastebasket, every bit of wallpaper, every candelabra, if they've got I don't know how you spend 140 grand on interior decoration, but there's probably some candelabras involved. Every mirror that he wonders why he's got no reflection every time he walks past it. The reduction in our public life, and you may think all politicians are liars, or that they're all as bad as each other. You're wrong. I've got some sympathy for you thinking that. You know they're wrong when someone comes along who makes the rest of them look like saints. But the sheer brazenness of it. I can't answer whether or not I attended a party in my own garden because Sue Gray is conducting an investigation. You remember Sue Gray got the gig after it emerged that the last bloke charged with conducting an investigation into Downing Street parties had thrown a Downing Street party. Or at least attended one. Had he thrown it or merely attended? Does it matter? So the first bloke to get the gig was guilty of the offence he was investigating. How amazed would you be if it turned out Sue Gray had been invited to the party that we're talking about today? How amazed would you be? Hand on heart, the May 20th party. If it turned out Sue Gray had been invited to it, would you be amazed? Would you? Would you? I wouldn't be amazed. What would amaze me now is a question I don't like to think about. What would amaze you now? We haven't even mentioned Shaggy yet, have we? The modus operandi that I pat myself on the back for formulating because it sounds quite clever and convincing is essentially a reworking of the lyrics to Shaggy's famous hit, It Wasn't Me, as many of you have reminded me, or It Wasn't Me, getting jiggy on the bathroom floor. So you'll remember this, of course. You'll remember the last time he was on the hook for parties thrown in his own house and or garden.
I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip.
Sorry, what, pardon? Right. I knew that was coming. I knew what he said. But I still can't quite believe the full content of what he said. Now remember, What can I say to get away with it? Self-gratification. Oh, whoops, I attended some of these parties. I'm not going to tell them that. What can I say now to postpone the consequences of my own actions? Here you go.
I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip.
He was furious to see that clip. Is that the Allegra Stratton clip that he's talking about? Allegra Stratton, all those tears on the steps of Downing Street, somehow forgetting about all the other parties that had been thrown. That would have been a good opportunity for her. Well, or would it? I don't know, you see. This is why journalists should never, ever go to work at Downing Street. Albeit that, like Dominic Cummings, she's married to a Spectator journalist. You think I make it up when I tell you how linked it all is and how corrupt these cabals, morally corrupt these cabals really are. So Dominic Cummings and Allegra Stratton both married to people on Andrew Neil's payroll. But Andrew Neil was an impartial presenter of politics on the BBC. Jeez. It'd be great, wouldn't it, if you didn't live here? So what would have happened if she'd said, actually, I've had a crisis of conscience. I can't believe that clip has emerged. And trust me, I've been lying awake in bed at night for the last 2 years because we had loads of parties. Boris Johnson attended more parties during lockdown than I attend in the average year. And I'm nowhere near as antisocial as I used to be. He's attended more parties than, I don't know, someone famous for attending parties. Who did it used to be when I was a gossip columnist? Nicholas Parsons used to attend a lot of parties. It was always nice to see Nicholas Parsons at parties. Who was famous? Elizabeth Hurley was quite famous for a while for attending the opening of an envelope. These people, Boris Johnson makes them look like stay-at-homes. Like stay-at-home, stick in the muds. What's a good joke there? Come on, someone write a punchline for me. He's attended more parties than... 11:09 is the time. Glenn's in Buryport in Wales. Glenn, what would you like to say?
It's just a first-time caller, and I listen to your show all the time.
Thank you, mate.
I don't necessarily agree with about 90% of what you say, but on this I do.
You will.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, I've been a Conservative voter all my life. Read the Daily Mail, I ain't going to change, but the thing is going to change. I'm never going to vote Conservative again. I don't want to tell you what I do to Conservative MP.
Yeah, but you only vote for them because the Daily Mail tells you to, Glenn.
No, I won't vote for them anymore. I vote for them, but
No, but you said I'd read the Daily Mail, I'm never going to change. So you'll do whatever they tell you to do next, mate.
Yeah, I make my own mind up, but I will never vote Conservative again.
You don't make your own mind up, Glenn. You think I'm wrong and the Daily Mail is right. You are not making your own mind up.
I don't read the Daily Mail all the time. I think I bought it about 2 years ago, but I used to read it.
You've already see what they've done to you now? You've already, in the space of 2 minutes, gone from saying I read it to saying I don't. Anyway, just keep listening. Keep listening to the programme.
But the thing is, cut long story short, I buried my cousin. My cousin was buried, and I had to stand outside a bloody funeral.
Yeah.
Right, in South Wales. I've been going there since I was 5 years old. I used to live in Hertfordshire, you probably tell by my accent.
Yeah.
Used to have to spend all the summer holidays up there, and I had to stand outside while she was buried.
Yeah.
You know?
I
couldn't even go inside the service.
I was at one of my best friends, mate.
It was last June, and them clowns are standing there, sitting outside, drinking wine and laughing.
I know.
I will never, ever vote for the Tory party again. I hate them.
When did it switch for you? When did it? Because just so you know,
that smirk on his face.
What, this morning?
No, all along. He's been smirking. The way he left his wife. You know, when she had. I lost my wife to cancer about 10 years ago, and I still haven't got over it.
Of course you haven't, mate.
And the way he can just walk out of a relationship, leave a cancer-stricken wife, marry his researcher, and just ain't got a care in the world. Do you know something?
Well, I do, and I feel for you. And just so you know, my daughter's godfather, one of the best men I'll ever know, we had to bury him in similar circumstances to the ones in which you had to bury your cousin. And he couldn't even give his dad a hug, you know. Couldn't even give his dad a hug. Or his wife.
My parents live in Hertfordshire, and I've seen them twice in 3 years. I decided to move to South Wales, so, you know. Right. I deliberately haven't worked for 18 months to keep everybody safe, you know, and I've suffered financially, but I thought I was doing the right thing. Yeah. And you see these clowns collecting them under 200 grand a year. And, I never agreed with you on a lot of the things, right?
But you keep coming back to that, and you can imagine how much it frustrates me.
I never agreed with you in the past.
You keep saying that.
Agree with you on, but
you keep saying that, Glenn. So can I ask you one question?
What?
The people you've just described, yeah?
Yeah.
Would you buy a second-hand car off them?
Tories, no, I wouldn't buy nothing off them.
Would you buy one off me?
I'd buy one off you, yeah.
There you go. Just think about that.
You've got a bit of a decent sort of moral way about you.
Just think about that. Next time you think you disagree with me about 90% of things. All right.
I'd never vote Labour, but
I'm not asking you to vote. I'm not asking you to vote Labour. I'm just asking you to think how you've ended up on the radio, having voted all your life for the people that you wouldn't buy a second-hand car off, thinking that you disagree with the bloke that you would buy the second-hand car off.
After what he's done,
about 90%
that smirk
of
on
things.
his face as well. That just crowned it. I mean, I wouldn't vote for him again anyway.
I don't just hear you. I feel you, Glenn.
I will never ever vote for them again. And God help anybody that knocks on my door with a blue rosette on. You know, I come from Dyed-in-the-Wool, Hertfordshire, where 99% of people.
Yeah.
You know.
I do know, and we could talk all day because I'd be fascinated to know why you're so certain you could never do this and you could never do that. But today's not the day. Today's the day for just articulating your disgust at what you did compared to what he did, and not just he. This is where I want to move the conversation next. They. It's not just one person. It's all very well saying a fish rots from the head down. I think it's biologically true, but whether it is or not, it's a very powerful figure of speech. But the rest of the fish, surely when you see the rot appearing, you think, it's time we can't get off a fish. I probably should have gone down a different analogous route on this one. But the rest of the people Glenn associates, the ones on the payroll, the ones in the inner circle, they see what they're serving. They see what they're serving, and they double down. I don't know how you do that. 13 minutes after 11 is the time. Mark's in South Molton in Devon. Mark, what would you like to say?
Well, it relates to what you were just referring to, actually. So when you've got ministers and special advisors and spokespeople and all the rest of it working for a prime minister, they have spent years, in many cases decades, leading up to this position where they hold, this whatever the position is. And they've trained themselves to basically be able to say any line that they need to. Now, in previous administrations, say with previous prime ministers, this would be to, for example, defend the increase in tuition fees, or to defend 75 pence on pensions, or to defend the abolition of the 10p tax rate. It would have been generally political, policy-based that they would have been arguing. But the problem is, when you've got someone like Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, it ends up all becoming about him and his lies and his agenda, and then covering up whatever other lies he said. And these people end up having to debase themselves, but they didn't go into it expecting to have to do that. They've ended up in this position purely, as you've just referred to, because of the character of the man at the top. The fish does rot from the head.
And there's another piece of the jigsaw that you've just found down the back of the sofa, Mark, because why have they got such a problem with civil servants? Why was Cummings always so desperate to get rid of people who do operate, albeit imperfectly, without fear or favour? Because they're going to be a huge obstacle to the sort of ideological rot that we should be able to do whatever the hell we want, regardless of the checks and balances or the demands of normal traditions and rights, if you like. So they hate proper civil servants, and they surround themselves with placemen on the payroll.
Yeah, that's right. But also, you ask, why do they stand it? Why don't they? Why can't they? Do something else or move on or whatever. You mentioned Allegra Stratton, and I think it's quite interesting with Allegra Stratton, because I remember when she was first appointed and there was all this hoo-ha about, she's going to be the Prime Minister's spokesperson, it'll be like the White House briefing.
Yes.
And it never happened.
No.
And I think we can see
They spent the money.
Happened.
They spent the money on the studio, but it never happened anyway.
Yeah, but she couldn't hold the line. She was laughing in that clip because she couldn't believe what she was having to defend, and she couldn't do it, and so they never actually did it. So not everyone is actually up to this. But I remember something. I don't like quoting people like this, but Jonathan Aitken.
Yes,
I read something he said many years ago, which was, and I think it was when he was president of the Oxford Union.
Okay.
And there was someone who couldn't argue a certain line. They'd been given a line to argue in a debate, and they couldn't. They said, "I can't do it." And he said to them, "You'll never be able to make it in politics. You have to literally be able to take any line and debate it. There used to be a programme on BBC Two called If I Ruled the World, where they had panellists who would argue. I remember Graham Garden was particularly good at taking some ridiculous line
like Bird
and
and
being
Fortune,
able to
isn't it?
somehow defend it.
I've resisted the urge. I resisted it with the earlier caller, but I'm not going to resist it with you. There's a whole chapter about this in my last book. A whole chapter, because I went to the same sort of school and I was a national debating champion. It is exactly as you describe it, and this is considered to be an amazing achievement, an amazing attribute. Whereas in fact, the ability to, well, Richard III probably put it best. I can murder and murder when I smile. It's not necessarily something we should be lionising and celebrating, is it?
Well, it's been hugely corrupted by this administration, and specifically because of Boris Johnson. And, you know, you said you don't like the analogies with Trump, and I don't either, because there are many ways in which Johnson is very different from Trump. However, when you look at the spokespeople who had to stand up and spout the absolute rubbish that Trump was insisting that they should spout, like, you know, they're not believing photographs of the number of people at his inauguration, and that was just at the milder end of the spectrum. We see this in a similar way happening with Johnson now. You know, there are ministers who are having to defend. You know, I saw Dr. I can't remember his name, Philip Dunn, is it, Tory MP on Newsnight last night? And he did his best. But my goodness, like, you could just see that he really didn't know what to say. And it's sad to see these people who I'm sure went into public life through good intentions being so corrupted and debased like this.
That 2019 intake, I don't know that they did go into public life through good intentions. I think the success of the culture war confection was to create a new generation of Conservative MPs who went into public life to break things and to hurt people. I actually genuinely believe that. It's one of my biggest worries. Every single time one of this 2019 intake pops up on the telly, they're coming out with things about, what the fellow who said that people will spend all their food vouchers, school meal vouchers in crack dens. I don't know whether he was 29 intake, but if he wasn't, he's like their patron saint. I don't know. I hope you're right. But something about that particular intake, and you think of the Rory Stewarts and the Ken Clarks and the Anna Soubrys and the people they replaced, that is fabric of the nation territory rather than just temporary political blip. Now, I gather Angela Rayner's urgent question will be asked at about 12:30. I don't know that there's any requirement for Boris Johnson to attend. Possibly has to ask Sue Gray first whether he's allowed to attend, does he? But, well, possibly he won't know whether or not he's attending until he finishes attending and then ask Sue Gray whether he attended or not, just with the party. See, that's not even funny. That's not even satire. Because yesterday he was asked whether or not he attended a party and he said, well, Sue Gray is investigating. So today he might turn up in the House of Commons, respond to Angela Rayner's urgent question about the party in Downing Street while the rest of us were enduring all manner of privations and problems. And then he'll walk out and they'll say, excuse me, Prime Minister, did you just attend that question from Angela Rayner that you just answered? And he'll say, Sue Gray is investigating. It's only 2 minutes after 11. What direction do you want to move in next? I probably haven't done enough, and Glenn reminded me of this down in Buryport. Glenn, who's going to buy my old car, I think, if I understood the tone of that conversation correctly. No, you, Les, in Buryport, mate. I'll do you a deal. The things you were doing at around that time, I have to fast forward to December of 2020 before I start telling you about things that may prompt me to start crying. I won't lie to you. Still very raw. Still see my godsons whenever I can, which is not as often as I would like, and still the gap left in their lives and our lives by the death of his dad is huge. And it's only on days like today that I remember the inadequacy of the funeral. We're going to make up for it when we can, but standing in a crematorium to say goodbye to someone who touched so many lives. I didn't know until we lost him just how many lives he'd touched. And standing in a crematorium with, was it 12 people were allowed? 12 people. And I told you I'd start crying. His boys never get that back. They never get that memory of how many people came to their dad's funeral. Almost everybody listening to this story will have a tale like this one. Almost everybody listening to this programme will have a wound like the one I'm describing. And mine is put there by the death of a friend, not a wife or a mother, but a friend, a great friend, a wonderful man. But his boys never get that memory. That's what really gets me today. Because there'd have been 1,000 people there if that had been allowed. There'd have been 1,000 people at their dad's funeral. And they never, ever would have forgotten that. They'd have carried it with them for the rest of their lives. And there were about 12 of us. And the people that put those rules in place, and I still respect those rules, and I still think those rules were right, the people who put those rules in place were having more parties than the rest of us have had in the last 2 years. That's it, isn't it? I get, as you do, excited by the politics. I get very much engaged by the cut and thrust of it, fascinated by the psychology. But when you pause, and it was actually Glenn, and I bit the lad's head off for having the audacity to tell me that he disagrees with 90% of what I said, but actually he got me today, of all the calls. Glenn talking about his cousin and talking about having to say goodbye in those straitened circumstances. And just like, you know what it's like when you remember people you've lost. Sometimes they mug you. Sometimes the memory mugs you, doesn't it? You hear a song, or you walk past a shop or a photograph. With my dad, oddly, it's the Catholic stuff. The Pope does something, and I still think, 10 years after he died, the Pope will do something, and I'll think, I must see what Dad thinks. Oh, no, I can't. And you did that to me today, Glenn, and I thank you for it. It's what we do. All human life is here. But the stuff we did to hold the line, the sacrifices we made to hold the line. And I know it wasn't Boris Johnson that issued the invitation, but who could honestly claim that Boris Johnson didn't create the environment? He was the architect, he was the builder, he was the bloody hod carrier of the environment in which everyone thought it was fine to have a party. How could you possibly inculcate a culture of rule obeying and guideline following when the man on the bridge of the ship breaks every rule he ever encounters? How can you possibly have a collection of people with even the vaguest scintilla of commitment to doing the right thing when their boss is a man who always does the wrong thing in his personal life, in his professional life, in his political life, everywhere he goes, everyone he touches, everywhere he turns? He rides roughshod over decency, he rides roughshod over rules, and he rides roughshod over respect for other human beings. So if you're struggling, as I am, to understand how so many people could have gone along with it, I think the answer might be quite banal. I think the answer might be quite straightforward. I think the answer might be, and it's only 11:30, so you've got plenty of time to disabuse me of this notion, but I think the answer might be that it was normal. Talk about the fish rotting from the head down, but there is a form of what you might call behavioural osmosis. Whose lead are you supposed to follow if not the person in front of you? You can't follow the lead of the people behind you. You can't even follow the lead of the people alongside you. You can only follow the lead of the person in front of you. And if the person at the very front is a person who thinks rules are for the little people, is a person who from his own school days has been described by everybody who knows him as apparently believing that the normal requirements of civilized society somehow do not apply to him. If you are being led by somebody with no respect whatsoever for any rules at all, whether they're marriage vows or coronavirus policies, if you are being led by someone like that, then maybe there's no mystery at all regarding how you end up thinking the rules are ridiculous or not intended to apply to you, because you're just following the lead of the man in front of you. And the closer you are to him, And thank God we're not. We obeyed the rules. Glenn stood outside his cousin's funeral. I went to my friends with barely a dozen fellow mourners. We obeyed the rules. Why? Because we're not close enough to Boris Johnson to have been infected by his leadership. You think coronavirus is contagious? Wait until you meet political corruption. And that doesn't mean these people are corrupt. I'm not defending them. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't quite understand them. But you can offer up an explanation that is not intended to sound like an excuse and say, how could these people have behaved so appallingly? Hello, Boris Johnson is their boss. I don't know if you've got anyone in your life who is reduced to trying to defend the Downing Street parties or to defend Boris Johnson's absolutely inextricable role in creating a culture where people previously, presumably quite decent people, thought they'd be okay. But if you have, I don't know how you deal with that. I saw that scum media was trending earlier, which normally involves a few people trying to blame news organisations for the news, and then loads of other people piling in on the same hashtag to say, don't be so stupid. And they use words like gammon. Don't be so stupid, gammons. You can't blame the news media for the news. And the idea that you could have lived in this country for the last year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, and thought that the news media was somehow biased against Boris Johnson's particular brand of conservatism, that's terrifying. That is genuinely terrifying. You could have lived here since 2015, say, when things really went a little bit nuclear, and thought that the news media is in any way... crikey, why do you think people get so cross with me? That there are not many people telling you the truth. LBC now, in the years that I've worked here, has become one of the most reliable news sources in the entire country. And the fact that we're free to give you an opinion means that sometimes, it involves eccentricities being broadcast over the radio, but you tune into Sheila or to Eddie or to Nick Abbott or to any of the people who have routinely and repeatedly been describing reality to you, and then wonder how people can end up thinking that the news media is... Darren Adam did an incredible job last night. An awful lot of people have been in touch today to tell me that. It's incredible. You can't... look, I'll tell you what hashtag scum media is. It's not complicated. It's not a particularly clever insight, but it's absolutely irrefutable. It is the social media equivalent of shooting the messenger because you don't like the message. 11:35 is the time. John is in Billericay. John, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello,
It was a very powerful monologue you had earlier on when you were talking about the father of those young boys.
Don't set me off again, John.
I know, it left a lump in my throat. And I think because it encapsulated the stories of so many people, and yet here we have a situation where our very own government are alleged to have broken the rules that they set. I mean, one of the reasons I phoned up is that back in January 2021, 31 police officers were given £200 fines for daring to have their hair cut at Bethnal Green Police Station.
That's right.
If the allegations about Downing Street turn out to be correct, will they get a refund? Or what about the 9 police officers that were fined £200 for daring to eat breakfast together in a Greenwich cafe before starting their shift? Will they get their £200 back? What about everybody else that has been lumbered with £200 fines for meeting their friends in the park for a sandwich or meeting their fellow mums in the park for a coffee? Will they get a refund? I just think it's an absolute disgrace.
Wasn't it 10 grand if you hosted the party?
It was, yeah. It was.
Oh,
10
hello.
grand. And,
hello, Sue Gray. I hope she hasn't forgotten that.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you will definitely remind us all, because that's one of the things I wanted to say as well, actually. I wanted to kind of thank half of your listeners for being the voice of reason, because to be honest with you, I don't have any trust in the mainstream media at all. I used to, but I just don't anymore. And the only person that I can kind of relate to from a journalistic perspective is yourself, because you speak the truth, and I don't think you're thanked enough for that.
Oh, stop it! I don't know. You're very kind, but there are plenty more, and I get lots of love. But you're very kind. You really are. And don't upset. Don't spoil. You say you don't trust the mainstream media. The newspapers are a joke. The massive majority of the newspapers are a joke. But most of the broadcasters do their best. Why do you think they had to set up GBBs? Because most of the other broadcasters are ploughing a decent course. And you have to set up something like GBB's to represent the madness of the Daily Mail and the Sun on television screens. Rupert Murdoch's setting up a new television station now. So give the broadcast media a break, John. Do me that favour.
I'll carry on listening to you. But, your researcher said to me, why do you think it is that Boris Johnson sort of gets away with it? And I think that he sees himself as being someone who is above the rules that apply to everybody else. And it's almost like I feel that he looks down on those around him. And I get the impression that his colleagues in Cabinet do as well. It's almost like they see us as being beneath them. There's something that they see in themselves that elevates them above everybody else around them, which is why they can get
I think you're right. And it's not true. And somewhere they know it's not true, but they love the idea that if they do this or they do that, then it might actually become true. So of course they're not better than you. Of course they're not better than me. Of course they're not better than the coppers who got their hair cut. But somewhere inside they're trying to create a world where everybody else believes that they are, even though they're not. And that's the Trump parallel that frightens me the most, is that all of these people now are trying to create a world where Trump really did win the last election and get it stolen from him, even though they know it's not true. Because they'll do better in that world, the world that is a lie, than they do in the world that is the truth. And that is a personality issue, isn't it? It's a character issue. It's a psychological thing, not a political thing. Because anyone can do it.
I think that's one of the reasons why so many people zone out from the main parts of the media. Because, like you say, we're now hearing certain voices in media try and tell us that Trump did win the election. And people aren't stupid. I think this is the thing. As when I was in the police, if you make the mistake of thinking that the general public is stupid, then woe betide you. And I think this is the mistake that so many politicians make. They genuinely believe that the general public are stupid. Like you said earlier on in your monologue when you opened the show, everybody knows they are lying. Yeah. Everybody knows they're lying. And they have the audacity to stand there staring into a camera, spinning this BS, thinking that we're going to believe it when we don't. And just because some columnist in the Daily Fowl writes about it doesn't mean that it's true.
But it does for the people reading it. They can construct a universe in which it is true. Do you know what? By complete coincidence, while you were talking, someone sent me a tweet that David Yelland, who is a former editor of The Sun, has put out in the last few minutes. He goes, I can easily name 10, maybe as many as 20 UK political journalists who must have known or should have known about this Johnson party. Their editors would fire them, except some of these mates of Boris are the editors. It will all end in tears. Ours. So there you go. Even a former editor of The Sun can see clearly now the rain has gone.
It's a cabal, like you said before. It's a cabal, and I am so disengaged from it. And I know that there are some decent politicians out there,
and some decent
but I feel sorry for them because their voices are getting lost.
Well, I'm glad you rang in, and I'm glad you. Obviously, I'm very touched by your compliments, but I'm more optimistic than you are, and I'm a little bit closer to the action than you. This too will pass is a great comfort, a great phrase, and the sense of growing realization, growing revelation is, I think, today, albeit that it's all underpinned by the memories of what most of us went through during lockdown, while this lot were having cheese and wine parties and various other knees ups. There is a sense of decency being just around the corner. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit too glass half full, but you got to be sometimes, John. Take care, mate. Thank you for the kind words. We'll talk again. And that's a fascinating tweet, isn't it, from David Yelland, who was an editor of The Sun and therefore knows exactly how things operate. Of course, turn your radio on or turn your telly on, and no doubt they'll be inviting the current political editor of The Sun or someone from a secretly funded think tank to explain to you why you should completely ignore everything John said. You should know your place, tug your forelock, and carry on revering Jacob Rees-Mogg. Roy's in Liverpool. Roy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Roy.
It's very, very, very hard for me to agree with anyone from The Sun, as you can probably understand.
Yes, of course.
But yeah,
ex-Sun,
100%.
Go on.
And it's just like I lost my auntie a few months ago through COVID, and I had to watch my two cousins, who my mum sadly passed away a long time ago, but loved to death. And I I had to watch them mourn her mother. And this man is holding parties.
Yeah.
And it just makes me sick. It makes me sick to my stomach. And it's not even a political thing.
No, it's not political.
No, it just makes
It'd be
me
the
sick.
same if your neighbours did it. It's like that times 100 because your neighbours didn't make the rules. But you'd get really cross about what other people were doing if you were obeying the rules. I used to get cross, Roy. Don't laugh. I got cross with joggers. If a jogger came up behind me really fast and breathing down my neck while I was being really, really careful and keeping my 2 meters. So if you get cross with a jogger, and now the people in charge of the rules were having parties, more parties than Ann Summers.
It just makes me absolutely sick that I couldn't attend my auntie's funeral, and I saw her 2 girls crying, and I couldn't hold them.
And that's been taken. I only realised that today. It's been taken away from them forever. That the quality of that goodbye can never be restored. However big a memorial service you have when things are back to normal, or however big a gathering you have, you can never take away that goodbye.
No. Yeah, not at all. Not at all. Just makes me sick. And I hope that this is I hope, it sounds horrible, I hope that this is the body punch that gets him.
Some people are suggesting it might be. Some people who have really been singing his praises from the rooftops right up until the most recent of days and weeks. But I don't know. It's an odd one, isn't it, given the death toll? But this is somehow more visceral than the death toll. I suppose the death toll does underpin the anger of people like you and indeed of me, although I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's more in sadness than in anger, because we did do this to ourselves, and you know, the importance of having contempt for the con men and compassion for the conned has never been more acute. It's a trap I fall into myself. I forget. Sometimes I forget at the beginning of my call with Glenn just down the road from you in Wales. You've got to try at least to remember that most of the bad stuff that people do is as a consequence of what has been done to them by people like David Yelland used to be when he was editor of The Sun, and he claiming today, I think correctly, I can tell you now, in case there's any doubt at all, that Theo Usherwood and Ben Kentish are categorically not the political journalists about whom David Yelland is talking. But when a former editor of The Sun says, I can easily name 10, maybe as many as 20 UK political journalists who must have known or should have known about this Johnson party, their editors would ordinarily fire them, except some of these mates of Boris are the editors. And they will be back on your radio tomorrow, or possibly even later today, these journalists. They'll be all over your television screens for the rest of today. And I don't know how you break that cycle. I really don't. I've described the cycle, I understand the cycle, I've condemned the cycle, but how you break the cycle? You've got to start with the think tanks. You've got to start with the secretly funded think tanks who are treated like honest brokers, treated like sages by precisely these newspapers. Because if you're peddling a line, if you're peddling propaganda on behalf of a politician, it doesn't look like propaganda if you then say, oh, and here is a fellow from the Institute of Wizard Wheezers. Here is a member of the Ratepayers Alliance. It makes it look like authority. It makes it look like the bilge they peddle has some sort of patina of credibility, some authenticity to it. There's a bloke the other day described, I think, in the Daily Mail as an expert. He was from the Taxpayers Alliance. So I just Googled him to find out what his previous job was. He was an expert on, this expert says. I don't think he'd ever had a job in his life except working as an advisor to a Conservative politician. It was either that or he worked for one of those dodgy websites, which, again, they'll be back on your radio later today. Oh, and my next guest writes for Tory Home, or whatever it might be. Which is, who pays for that? Who funds it? Where does the money come from? Because they create this idea that this is why John in Billericay probably had a bigger point than I gave him credit for. But I don't know if this is precisely what he meant. You've got think tanks now that have got their own websites that are designed to look like newspapers. So you want to start breaking it, you're going to have to start breaking the infrastructure, the ecosystem that allows propaganda to look like journalism. Otherwise, you end up with people in Downing Street who make rules that the rest of the country have to obey, while creating a culture at the very top of our country's power structure that leads everyone in it to believe that the rules don't apply to them. If you are a student of these matters, and you're wondering whether it's over now or what happens next, I think that the biggest one is yet to come. And I base this entirely and exclusively upon Dominic Cummings's ranting, which is obviously not reliable in a definitive sense. Hell hath no fury like a Brexiter scorned. But he is spitting nails still about the fact that Carrie Johnson, Boris Johnson's current wife, Carrie Johnson according to Dominic Cummings, she threw a party in the actual flat on the night that Cummings walked the plank. That's got to be the next one to break. If they can pin down somebody who attended that party, if Cummings is telling the truth, of course, and he is one of the most famous liars in the country, but how many times have you heard me say even a stopped clock is right twice a day? And he revealed this party that we're all talking about today last Friday in his blog, so he's been proved right about that one. You would, if you were a betting man, take that as evidence that he's probably right about the other one as well. And you can understand why he would be more infuriated by the party mysteriously thrown by the Prime Minister's wife, with whom he famously had considerable beef, as I believe the kids say, than he would be about any of the other parties. How can they be getting cross about the cheese and wine? She had a celebration party when I got chucked out of Downing Street. Would be but Dominic Cummings' position. I should remind him, the phone lines are open. Dom, always assured of a warm welcome. If you want to reveal a little bit more about that party, then I will provide you with an honest ear. And, of course, no one could then accuse you of speaking to sycophants or client journalists or the kind of people responsible for propelling you and your ludicrous former boss to the very highest office in the land. Yeah, on reflection, that's not the warmest invitation I've ever issued. 0345 6060 973. Anne Summers, one of the answers to the question, what's the best way to end this gag? Boris Johnson's thrown more parties than Anne Summers. Tried that out with the last caller. I'm not sure it landed well. I was going to go for Jamie Vardy, but that might be a bit niche. Jamie Vardy, I think, copyrighted at one point the phrase Jamie Vardy's having a party. So I'm going with Tupperware. They've thrown more parties than Tupperware at Downing Street during the course of it. No, don't pull a face like that, Keith. What have you got? You said Duncan from Blue. That's absolutely... You think you can sneer at Tupperware when you came up with... I think Duncan from Blue would be a really good punchline for that party's joke. Yeah, thanks for that. Henry is in Preston. Henry, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning.
Hello.
I'd just like to sort of try and break down a bit of the psyche of Boris Johnson in the fact that I think, basically, he's a bully. And behind any bully, you have a baying crowd, because it's easier to support that bully than be bullied yourself. And I go back to what you were talking about with your penguin bars. You were supporting somebody who had gone and broken into the tuck shop.
Yes.
But you were unwilling to dob that person in.
Correct. I was also complicit. I mean, I wasn't taken by surprise by evidence. I was one of the planners of the raid.
Absolutely. But you followed that person who actually committed the crime.
Yes.
And it's a little bit like that with Johnson. He is the bully, and people follow him because it's easier to follow.
Well,
easier to follow.
I think that the memories of the school days would be for some people, if you came to the attention of the bully and then the attention shifted to someone else, the temptation to join in is irresistible, because the more you join in on the bullying of this kid here, the less likely the spotlight is to return to you. That's got to be part of it as well.
Exactly, which is why these people that are put up every day to support him actually support him, because it's easier to do that, because if you don't do it, he'll get rid of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely part of it, isn't it? But it doesn't. It's not. I mean, no single or simple explanation is going to be all of it. But it is that sense of, well, if I don't do what he wants, I don't know though. Who? Well, Cummings, I suppose, has felt his ire. Who ends up being bullied by him?
Well, I don't know whether that's right, because people put themselves up and they genuinely lie.
That's the point, isn't it?
And they lie to support him.
Yeah, okay, so bullying is analogous rather than descriptive. So they are supporting the miscreant.
Yes.
You're right.
Because it's easier.
Yeah. Is that okay? You okay? There's a horn went off in the background. You're not standing in the middle of the road, are you, Henry?
No.
Take care. Speaking of sound effects, if you do follow me on Twitter, there's a rather lovely clip I've just said. Thank you, Henry. I like that. So it is complicity. It's described complicity. But why? Well, because what's the alternative? You're out in the cold. You're walking the plank. You're persona non grata. If you and maybe they look at Cummings and think, well, crikey, I can't afford to upset him. But the point at which they say, could you go out today? Could you go around all the studios today? Who did it in the end? I was thinking they might bring Chris Grayling out of storage. He was Theresa May's go-to cabinet minister when someone needed to defend the indefensible. Kwasi Kwarteng got lumbered with it last week. That was horrible to watch because he seems like, a relatively decent guy. Jenrick's my favourite. Honest Bob Jenrick in the back of a car coming back from Sky having defended something Boris Johnson had denied, and then Boris Johnson admitted it was true or something like that. Who did they send out today? Who did the ministerial rounds today? Have we got any footage of that? Have we got that yet? Well, let's have a little listen. Here he is, Edward Argar. His name is named after an oven on Good Morning Britain with Susanna Reid.
Well, what he's saying is, I've asked Sue Gray to look into this as an independent figure.
Asking Sue Gray whether he was at the party. Sorry, that's not taking it seriously.
Susanna, he's asked her as an independent figure of the highest integrity to look into all aspects of these allegations and reports, and I think that is absolutely the right way to do it. He shouldn't come and I don't think before that point.
Does he have to ask Sue Gray, who we can be pretty sure wasn't at the party, whether he was at the party?
I think it's important that he lets her conduct her investigation without intervening at particular points or answering particular things. He should follow the investigatory process, which he's asked her to do. Let her do that, and let her do that free from interference. And then when she publishes her findings, which I hope she'll do quickly, because I'm keen to see exactly what she finds.
There's one person who knows whether the Prime Minister was at that party beyond all doubt, and that is the Prime Minister. And it is remarkable that he has to ask a third party whether he was there or not.
Susanna Reid bringing all the truth bombs to the table as a minister called Edward Argar sought to defend the indefensible. And I opened the programme this morning with a slightly odd reference to a video game I used to play as a kid called not as a kid, as a young adult who should have known better. And it was called, you've reminded me, Soul Reaver. And it did involve sucking the souls out of people in order to bolster your own strength, which is, I think, a slightly crude précis of what Matthew Parris wrote about. Matthew Parris described Boris Johnson as a vampire, so that would be the blood. And you could hear Edward Argar's soul disappearing halfway through that interview. There was a little point after Susanna hit him with that, hang on a minute, why does he have to ask Sue Gray, who wasn't at the party, whether or not he was at the party? And Edward Argar's job is to defend it. And there he is, a little sparrow, nibbling away at the seeds of corruption and untruth in the palm of Boris Johnson's hand. And I don't know whether he has any choice. Could he just fly away? He's thrown more house parties than Noel Edmonds. I think we've got a winner, haven't we? I was quite pleased with Tupperware. Thank you to everybody who pointed. You need to phrase it right. So more parties than Noel Edmonds didn't quite land, did it? But he's thrown more house parties than Noel Edmonds. Seems to be a fairly reliable description of Boris Johnson's conduct during lockdown. And I'm not going to apologise for smiling. I think I've gone to the other emotional extreme in the course of today's programme. But you'll understand why we have to have light and shade on the programme. And although many of you are recalling and sharing tales of horrors you endured as a consequence of obeying the rules that Boris Johnson's government imposed, I still think rightly, I think I always will think rightly, then the necessary levity that we bring to other areas of this conversation is what makes us human and keeps us sane. Oh, Billy and Borden's dived in with a late contender. So he's thrown more parties than Nigel Farage has created. That's pretty good too. Oh no, we've got a proper two-horse race now. He's thrown more house parties than Noel Edmonds, or he's thrown more parties than Nigel Farage has started. I'll go with that. I think I'll go 52-48 for the Noel Edmonds, which is a nice reversal of statistics. And speaking of Farage, if anyone can explain to me what on earth he's doing in Novak Djokovic's house in Belgrade, I'll give him the money myself. Quite incredible. Nigel Farage now complaining about an Eastern European falling foul of Australia's immigration rules. Even I wouldn't have predicted that. And I've predicted every grubby twist and turn of Nigel Farage's so-called career since he first appeared in this studio and had to be dragged out of it by his own PR after metaphorically soiling himself live on air. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's get back to the story in hand. And there's no particular call to arms today. It's a multifaceted conversation heading towards 12:30 when I'm told the Paymaster General will be answering Angela Rayner's urgent question about Downing Street parties. Theo Usherwood will join us shortly before that to tell us why. Why is the Paymaster General doing it? They're going to need a bigger fridge, aren't they, if Johnson's going to carry on hiding? PMQ's tomorrow. He'd be expected to attend that. And it's the curse of the true liberal, is that you try to see the best in everybody. If you are still trying to defend him or why is anyone talking about this? Why haven't we moved on? It's really easy. You do know deep down. But if it's defensible, why isn't he going to defend it himself? You have to ask yourself that, because the contempt in which he holds you is nothing compared to the contempt in which he holds his critics. He respects his critics, I think, because he knows they're telling the truth. As he lies and lies and lies again and you swallow it, it's you he hates. So if you've been reduced today to defending him or subscribing to a #scummedia Twitter trend or pretending to believe that it's not important or asking why we haven't moved on, it's you he hates. Not the critics, not the truth tellers. It's you, because he looks at you and thinks they'll swallow this crud. He looks at you and thinks, yeah, they're still going to be tugging their pathetic little forelocks. He looks at you and thinks, I can say whatever the hell I like. I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. So what you need to ask yourself is, why isn't he defending himself? How has he got you to do it? And you might start with Edward Argar. Francis is in Cricklewood. Francis, what would you like to say?
I lost my youngest son in the 11th of December 2020. It was quite brutal. He was a really well-nourished, well-fit 39-year-old, but he had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is a undenied heart condition. Yes. And the police came round to tell me. Oh, no. We managed to get his funeral about a few weeks later, even though they'd frozen his body over Christmas because the coroners went off work. And I saw him in his coffin, and we had the funeral, and there was only about the family there because my other two children are doctors, and they have children, and they wanted the children at the funeral, and they were worried about COVID. So Paul was my son that I lost, was really, really popular and had lots of friends, and none of them could come. Yeah. And I listened to what you're saying today about Boris Johnson. I feel so angry, so angry for my son. And I know underneath my anger, I'm really, really hurt. Yes. I really, really feel hurt that the send-off for my son was so limited. I'm really pleased. There's three things I'm pleased about today because I never stopped thinking about him. Of course. I never stopped aching and pining for him. Three things that made me feel cheerful today was the receptionist and my doctor was really loving to me. Number two was you taking the French president's word out of Boris. And number three was listening to your program, really, about... And, sorry, number four was Angela. What's her surname?
Rayner.
I really, really like her life experience. I think it should be really good. And I'm really, really pleased that I'm going to hear her later on. No matter how bad she is, no matter how good she is.
He's not going to be there. He's not going to be there.
Sorry?
Johnson's not going to be there. He's going to be hiding, I think. He's sending someone else to answer.
Well, there'll be blood on the carpet, I'm hoping.
Well, metaphorically, I hear you.
Yeah, metaphorically, of course. But I just feel so lost and.
I know.
Is this it?
Well, you don't need me to remind you that you and your family did the right thing. And just because he did the wrong thing doesn't change the fact that you did the right thing. So, although you feel as if you were treated with contempt, you mustn't feel anything but justified and rational in doing what you did and what your doctor children, your two other children, said you should do.
I went by them. I thought,
Yes.
the grandchildren.
Of course.
That's what's keeping me alive at this moment.
The grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would swap places with my son in a blink. I can't say heartbeat because of his heart. I watched Netflix last night. It was, what's his name, Ricky, what's the funny guy?
Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, Afterlife. And I thought, I bet this is going to be awful.
Yeah.
But actually,
it's
it was
lovely.
pretty better than all the grief books I've read.
Gosh.
Because he nailed it on the head.
And
How you
you
feel?
you almost smile through your tears when you're watching that, don't you?
Yeah, you laugh
You do.
now and again
You
because
do.
he's funny.
Yeah.
And most of the time, you just cry and you just identify with what's going on, you know?
I do.
But I just feel like, how dare he? How dare he speak to us like this and warn us like this?
I know, and saying, when I heard about it, I was furious. It was about a fortnight. It's hard to keep up, Francis, isn't it? It was about a fortnight ago, was it? Or more, maybe before Christmas, the Allegra Stratton thing, and he stood up in the House of Commons and said, I understand how people feel about this because I was furious about it. And as he says those words, somewhere inside he knows he's done worse, or at least he's aware of worse being done. I don't get it, Francis.
It's just like, I just don't get it either. Are we demented? Are we stupid? Are we obtuse? What's wrong with us? I mean, I was in Waitrose this morning, I got some shopping, and I get the paper free.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture of his wife, Carrie, what's her name?
Yeah.
And there she was in this magnificent coat and
It's a dress.
hairband.
It's a £695 dress.
Yeah, which was absolutely looked awful actually on her. And I just thought, where the hell is my boy? My boy. Where's my boy in all this? My son.
Yeah, I know. I hear. And I don't know what to say to you, except that, you know, this too will pass, but your boy, you can't bring him back. And he didn't die. He didn't die because of Boris Johnson, but the funeral was reduced as a consequence of policies that had to be brought in. So that wasn't Boris Johnson's fault either. But the knowledge that you were obeying the rules when he wasn't, I don't know how you cure that feeling that you've got. I really don't.
I think, you know that expression, this too shall pass, I
Yes.
always believed in it, but it will never pass, this feeling about my son. And I've joined a group, the Compassionate Friends, grief people, and they say you grow around the grief. You just grow a little bit every year, but it never goes away. So this too shall pass.
Yeah.
I used to really like that. It doesn't do it for me anymore.
I understand. I do. And I'm sorry. I'm just sorry, Francis. You take care, yeah?
Thank you.
No, thank you. And don't forget those grandchildren. They need you.
Yeah, and I won't forget what you said about Boris.
I don't, if you do.
But he affected my funeral.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? And you can't get that back. And I almost wish I hadn't opened that little box today because, like you, I don't know if I'm going to be able to close it again. And that in my case, not grandsons, but godsons. Thinking of that goodbye that they were robbed of. And again, I have to keep reminding myself that it had to be done. We did the right thing. We obeyed the rules. The rules were good. But the person telling us to obey them wasn't obeying them, and that's going to be a very, very, very hard genie to get back in the bottle, however hard you tug your forelock ordinarily, or however readily you doff your cap. How do you get that back? And I don't know which bit you picked. Do you pick him saying he was furious when he found out about parties, when he clearly wasn't because he was throwing them? Do you get cross about the minister wheeled out this morning to get handed his testicles in a sock by Susanna Reid on Good Morning Britain. What do you do? What do you get cross about? What was the first one? What was the first clip we played today? Him yesterday. Let's play that one again before we hit the break. The first one from today, because he actually sniggers. He sniggers.
I want to ask you about the latest allegations on Christmas parties. Did you and Carrie attend the Downing Street party that was organised by Martin Reynolds on the 20th of May?
All of that, as you know, is the subject of a proper investigation by Sue Gray.
So have you already been interviewed by Sue Gray? And if not, do you object to her questioning you again about this?
All that is subject for an interview, for an investigation by Sue Gray.
Quite a few of you are pointing out that Johnson didn't say he was furious when he found out about the parties. He said he was furious to see the clip. And I don't know. I mean, there's a danger of Kremlinology, is that even the right word? There's a danger of overthinking it, but it's actually perhaps a very good point, because he probably by accident tells the truth sometimes. Should we listen to that one again? And just because I love it when you pick up on stuff that I've missed, because it keeps me honest.
I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip.
Martin's in St Albans. Can you remember why you rang in?
I do remember why I rang in. I was watching that interview that you played earlier where you talked about Boris Johnson kind of sniggering during his answer to the question, did you and Carrie attend the party on May 20th? And drawing a parallel to what you were saying earlier about the slip in the language that Boris Johnson was furious about the video coming out versus furious about the event actually happening. There was another slip in that particular interview on Sky News this morning, because when he was asked a direct question, did you and Carrie attend the party, whilst he gave the typical political dodge answer about the investigation that you've just been talking about, his body language answered the question. He nodded his head emphatically yes when he was then answering that question, giving the political dodge. In body language terms, we call that a truth slip, where the body speaks the truth whilst the mouth says something else. It's a very strong indicator of what he's actually thinking. And then the typical Priti Patel little smirk, which is called duping delight, in between the first and second question, you can just see the corners of his mouth turning up, because he successfully delivered his dodge answer rather than actually answering the question, which then breaks into the full-blown nervous laughter that you played earlier in your clip. So it comes back to the point you made earlier about the contempt that Boris Johnson has for the ordinary people. It doesn't appear that he even has the grace to try and lie subtly. It just seems to be really, really blatant in his body language.
This is your field, clearly.
Yes, yeah. I published a card deck last year called Body Language Decoder, and had a whole section on it on deception tells. And I work with people to effectively use your body language, and Boris Johnson certainly seems to be somebody who seems to ignore the body language signals that he gives out, because this is very, very common. He did the same thing at COP when he was asked about the coal and said he wasn't in favour of further coal stations, but actually nodded his head yes. I
was going to bite your head off. I was going to say, well, this wouldn't stand up in a court of law, and obviously it could only ever be evidence; it could never be verdict. But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I waited, because your authority shines through. That phrase "duping delight," I think, is a new one on me. That's an established psychological thing, is it?
That was coined by body language expert Paul Ekman, who's the foremost expert in deception detection, and it is that.
You can't do my holiday cover, can he?
Sorry?
Couldn't do my holiday cover, could he? The foremost expert in deception detection.
It's still a